Here we are with Dr. Thomas Barnard. We are most appreciative of his time, his energy, and his concern. I would like to start off this time together with you telling a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a physician, trained at Cornell University, the University of Rochester Medical School in the States. I did postgraduate training as a family doc, and I did a year of anesthesia and emergency medicine training because I was really interested in working in remote places, and I wanted to run an air ambulance. The first thing I did actually when I went into practice back in 1980 was I used to work in the northwest of Ontario, running an air ambulance and flying around an area the size of France to a lot of different First Nations reserves. And so I had a lot of interesting experience with parts of the world and with people, who as a young doc growing up in New York State, I really didn't have a lot of exposure to. So, in a way that early experience in my medical practice had a lot to do with shaping my worldview, or at least changing it. And one of the things that was interesting about that worldview is that First Nations people have a very different perspective on many things about their relationship to the natural world. And certainly their comfort with phytomedicines, plant-derived medicines, natural medicines, was actually really interesting. And many of their native elders, many of the First Nations elders, and many of their healers in their communities were really interested and very well versed in using things that were available in nature to help. And that was one of the things that interested me in cannabis as one of a number of different possible plant groups that could offer us safe and effective treatment modalities for people. Because when you work as a physician, for better or worse, we have a number of very powerful tools at our disposal. And one of the problems we've seen, for example, with medical marijuana and the cannabinoid family of potential medications and natural substances that are beneficial possibly to health, is that because they've been regulated as illegal substances, because in North America, for the most part, the cannabinoid substances have been seen as narcotics, they've been so regulated that we've had a hard time getting a hold of them to even do any research, whether that was informal research or whether that would be research in a more formalized setting. And that's really, as compared to other parts of the world, like the Netherlands or Austria or Israel, where a lot of legality has been associated with the use of cannabinoid-derived materials, they are way ahead of us in terms of research. The other bias we have in North America is that we tend to believe mostly what research we do in our own backyard. And unfortunately, like I say, we've been real limited in what we've been able to do. So over the years as a doc, I've been in practice for 34 years. I practiced anesthesia for a large part of the early part of my training, partly because I was in a remote place and there was nobody else doing anesthesia. But even when I moved to bigger centers, and in anesthesia, of course, you're always looking for ways to relieve pain. I traveled to China. I studied acupuncture in China back in the mid-'80s. And it was interesting, in China, you would see a pharmacy in the hospital. And on one side, there'd be rows of pill bottles. And right next to that, there'd be piles of plants, and things that were used as part of their, traditional Chinese pharmacopoeia. So in the West, I think we've been a little bit, in a way, behind the times, or at least our experience has been directed in other ways, partly by the legal system and partly by profit, motivation here. So it's very interesting to me to see the anecdotal stories of people coming to me as patients. Ideally, you have a relationship with your doctor where you can pretty much tell them anything. You should, right? It's a confidential relationship. There should be a relationship of trust. So I have a lot of people who come to me and they'll say, I was just talking this morning to a fellow who was a boxer, and I was saying to you earlier, he had 90 fights. And anecdotally, what he did in the belief that he was protecting his brain after being injured during a fight, he would smoke marijuana And because when you look at the animal studies we have, there's a good traction with cannabinoids in reducing inflammation. So his belief was he was protecting his brain. And you know, when he looks at his colleagues, also boxers, in his same age group, he is much more functional than they are in terms of memory loss and, you know, various things. Look at poor Muhammad Ali and his Parkinson's. So do we know that as a fact, if you took a cannabinoid product of some kind after getting hit in a hockey game or after being, you know, injured in boxing, that it would save your brain from damage? Well, we don't, because we haven't been able to study it. And why shouldn't we study it? I mean, that's the point. I would love to have a tool like that I could say to a kid who's going out to a hockey game, hey, listen, you take this pill after the hockey game. If you get hit in the head, hopefully it's going to reduce your risk, you know, of having damage, you know, over your lifetime. And in professional sports, this is such a huge development. You know, we make all kinds of fancy helmets for athletes, but now we're looking at really people ending their careers early for fear that they've had actually some, you know, damage and that they don't want to compound that damage. People are retiring in their 30s. Excuse me. So I think that we need the opportunity to look at some of the stories we hear from our patients where people say, oh, well, you know, I use a little marijuana because that's the only thing that helps me sleep. And, you know, we have drugs to help people sleep, but as everybody knows, most of the medications we have, some are great and they're very good tools, but they also all have a sort of a second line of side effects. Sometimes sleeping pills, as a good example, produce dependency. Sometimes they're actually addictive. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you've got a hangover and you can't think clearly. And it would behoove us to find better tools, the best tools out there. And maybe, from the stories people tell me, one of those tools might be a cannabinoid. So it's exciting. And you know, this isn't new news. The actual word for anesthesia in China, the character for anesthesia, actually means cannabis intoxication. You know, it's like 3,000 years old. I mean, and it may have been that was not cannabis sativa, the common strain we use now. It may have been cannabis indica, which is maybe a stronger anesthetic. Nonetheless, that the idea is this has been around for a while, you know. So why wouldn't we be able to, in a safe, and I was using the term dispassionate, you know, we have to not be emotional in discussing it. We got to find good evidence for people. And sure, if we're going to make marijuana legal, we have to look at, well, what are the implications for people driving under the influence of cannabinoids? Well, we don't really know. You know, we do know anecdotally, again, based on what everybody reports, that people don't usually get into a rage with cannabinoid products as opposed to, say, alcohol, that they don't tend to drive too fast with cannabinoids. In fact, they tend to drive slower. But we don't have good studies and we don't have good regulations. We have to address all that. Right now in Canada, there's a lot of hope that the cannabinoids will become in some way more widely available, more widely legalized, perhaps with the new Trudeau government federally. Under the Harper administration federally in Canada, physicians have been put squarely in the middle of the ability of a person to get medical access to cannabinoid medicines. And maybe that's appropriate, maybe it's not. In some ways, it might be better if it was possible for people to access cannabinoids, like in the beer store or something, you know, and have that sort of regulation that there was a certain age or whatever. Although, I have to admit, in children, as a good example, you know, that whole experience with the young girl who had intractable seizures, and that whole strain of cannabis, which is called Charlotte's Web, which was really developed to help this child originally, and no doubt others, to avoid seizures. And this young woman went from, I think she was 6 years old, went from having 300 seizures a week to having 4 seizures a month by being able to use a strain of marijuana that was specifically formulated to provide a high level of one of the plant chemicals in cannabis, which is called cannabidiol. And that one is interesting because it seems to control seizures, it has anti-cancer effects as far as we can see, it tends to reduce inflammation, and it tends to reduce pain, but it does not give the psychoactive effect of the other well-known ingredient in cannabis, which is called 9-delta-tetrahydrocannabinol, which is called THC, basically. So if we have strains of marijuana available that are really good at reducing seizures and really good at reducing pain, wow, that would be great. And if we didn't have to worry about the anxiety that sometimes is associated with people using the psychoactive components of cannabinoids, the THC components, good. And there'll be other examples where the THC component might be more desirable. But we need good direction, we need good research, we need good understanding of what's the best way of applying a cannabis-derived medication, as an example, to a given individual situation. Unfortunately, all of the marijuana-derived or the cannabis-derived medications are also all classified as Class 1 drugs. So they're all classified as narcotics, which makes them less available than they would otherwise be. So it would be nice to see that classification of even those medications changed, so that it would be more comfortable for physicians who are just learning about cannabis-derived medications. If it wasn't classified as a Class 1 drug, they might want to learn about it and be more likely to use it. So, and honestly, my own experience in my adult life with cannabis has been mostly in the stories people come and tell me about how it's benefited them. And some of those stories are quite remarkable, because when you look at the laboratory evidence we have, there's a good reason to believe for many primary cancers, breast cancer being a good example, that cannabis may prevent cancer in some situations, but also that it may be useful in treating both estrogen receptor positive and estrogen receptor negative breast cancer, and even in preventing metastatic spread of the cancer, which is really exciting for us. So I mean, again, we don't have all the answers to those questions because we haven't been able to get the research available. But when you look around the world, there is a lot of research suggesting that's a wonderful avenue of potential. And I have a lot of clients, for example, who are young women who are premenopausal, who just had a baby and then turn up to have, sadly, a breast cancer. And granted, you hope they're cured by traditional means and whatever they have to have in the way of treatment. But what if we could add to that treatment a cannabinoid that would help prevent recurrence, that would help prevent spread? Wouldn't that be exciting? And I feel like, in a way, we're restricted in access to a series of tools that might be life-saving for people. And then let's say we had a person who went on, unfortunately, to have more trouble with the diagnosis of something like cancer, and they had bone pain, or they had metastases to the lungs. There's some evidence in the lab, at least, that cannabinoids would really help reduce their discomfort. That is, it may even help recede lung spread of tumors from breast into lung, which is unfortunately a common direction that breast cancer takes when it spreads. And there's some lab evidence to suggest that you could actually cause those tumors to regress, not to mention that the person's shortness of breath or discomfort from the tumors that had already spread seems to get better, at least in some laboratory evidence. So colon cancer prevention, colon cancer treatment, there's some suggestion that that would be benefiting. What we're trying to do, really, is we're trying to assess a person's risk, we're trying to minimize their risk, and we're trying to optimize their quality of life. It's a theory from Stanford professor James Fries called compression of morbidity. So whatever tools we need to make that happen, we want those tools. So again, my view is we need to look at this carefully. We need to be able to have access to tools like this. We need to be able to understand the proper way to use them and who will best benefit from them. And so my own experience up to now has been limited by the fact that we're in a sort of prohibitionist legal climate, which I'm hoping is changing. It obviously has changed to some degree. And I mean, as a physician, I would like to be able to help people with a new series of tools that are beneficial and have little drawback. And again, I'd be the first person to say we need to understand more how to use the tools in the toolbox of the phytocannabinoids. It's exciting. I mean, these tools have been around for thousands of years. So there's no reason now all of a sudden that we would have to reinvent the wheel, but we do have to satisfy ourselves that what we're doing is safe and that what we're doing is effective. Up to now, what we've relied on are people experimenting in the laboratory of their own life, which I'm a proponent of, but we just want to try to keep people out of harm's way. And I wish we knew enough to do that. So I think we're learning a lot, and I think these are exciting. There's an exciting potential for doing a lot of good for a lot of individuals, and that's the fun part about it, and hopefully the beneficial part.
Great, thank you. Moving along, I wonder if you could give us some tips for wellness.
Sure. So look, keep in mind, again, with this idea that our goal is to assess an individual's risk, to reduce their risk, to optimize their quality of life, to have them live as long as they can, being functional and not diminishing as they age. So it's called rectangularization of the morbidity curve. So you want to be like Jack LaLanne, you want to be fit and strong until you're 96 and then just die in your sleep, right? So that's the goal. Could the cannabis medications be helpful in that quest? I think they could. But keep in mind that along with anything we do in the way of marijuana-derived benefits, we want to look at the tools we know work, which are essentially lifestyle. It brings up a good point that if you're going to be using marijuana, you wonder if maybe smoking marijuana wouldn't be a good idea because of the potential negative effects of smoking. But there are many other ways to use marijuana-derived medications, either as pills or as alcohol solutions or as vaporized products where you don't expose your lungs to smoke. Although the truth is, while we can show that smoking tobacco damages people's lungs, we can document that, the studies that have been done trying to document that same damage with smoking cannabinoids actually have produced no damage that we know of. Nonetheless, the thought is that it would be better maybe to avoid that sort of thing. But along with whatever we're going to do with the addition of a cannabinoid-derived health aid, what we want to do is be fit, be active, eat real food, not too much, mostly plants is really a good way to look at it. And so, if we pay attention to those things, then we age much more gracefully. It's not that any tool in our toolbox that we're aware of will stop aging, but we can change what aging does to the body's systems. And the best tools we have right now are honestly simple tools like the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle, where when you look at individuals in the EPIC trial in Europe between the ages of 70 and 90, if those individuals just ate a Mediterranean style diet and they basically were a bit more active, they reduced their death from all causes by 50%. We don't even have a drug that comes anywhere near that. And I'm not sure the cannabinoids would either, although there is some evidence that cannabinoid-derived medications may have a role in reducing inflammation and what's called oxidative stress from metabolism in the body. And those are some of the hallmarks of aging. So maybe there's going to be room for those tools to be useful in retarding the effects of aging, right? And making it possible for us to follow a therapeutic or beneficial lifestyle and diet, into our very old years. That's the goal, to make it possible to be active and fit and vibrant, to reduce, because the hallmarks of aging are inflammation, glycation, which is the sticking of sugar to proteins, and the decline of our ability to effectively produce energy in our bodies. Those are the hallmarks of aging. And interestingly, we have some reason to believe that the cannabinoids themselves, the marijuana, medical marijuana itself, may at least reduce inflammation. It seems like it may in fact help with sugar control in diabetics. And as far as the decline of energy production, again, most of that seems to be tied into inflammation and damage to the little furnaces of the cells, which are called mitochondria. And cannabinoids look like they may have a protective effect there too. You know, remember there was a drug released on the market, which was a cannabinoid drug, Ramonabad or Acomplea, a few years ago. It was released in Europe. And it was a drug marketed originally for weight loss. But that one pill a day controlled your blood pressure, lowered your blood sugar, helped you lose weight, and lowered your cholesterol, all in one pill. It was like freaking amazing. So, but unfortunately, in the European trials, some people, about 10% of them, became anxious when they took it. So for that reason, and for medical legal concerns, it was taken off the market. But it shows you the potential, you know, the power of a cannabinoid-derived medication like that that seemed to do so much. Because remember, the receptors for cannabinoid-derived chemicals in the body, first of all, we have naturally derived cannabinoids that are there all the time. The classic neurotransmitter is called anandamide. And you know, if any of you have done yoga or studied yogic philosophy, ananda, that word in Sanskrit, means bliss. So it's called anandamide. It's like a bliss amino acid sort of thing, right? So that's a naturally occurring neurotransmitter. And it has, you know, effects all the time in our body, much like we have naturally occurring narcotics, right? You know, the endorphins, so-called, or enkephalins. So I think what we're looking to do is find ways to take advantage of this widespread endocannabinoid system in the body, which, by the way, you know, one of the interests we have in that, if I haven't mentioned this before, is that the endorphin system of narcotic receptors includes receptors in the lower part of the brainstem. The lower part of the brainstem is where you control your respiration and your heart rate. That's why people die of overdose if they take too much narcotic. But the cannabinoids, which may be equally effective in some cases in relieving pain, there's no cannabinoid receptors that can suppress respiration and heart rate. There are no receptors in that part of the brain. So that's cool. I mean, no matter how much you take, you're not going to die from that overdose. You know, you may feel wonky, but you're not going to die. And that's one of the reasons we've honestly been, you know, also excited about the potential for this class of intervention agents. So, yes, you know, a good lifestyle has to accompany anything we hope to achieve with cannabinoid-derived medications. And again, eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. Think of it that way. And the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle is really what we have the most evidence for.
Beautiful. I'm wondering now if we could look at the next right thing for people that are concerned about their health and they're looking forward. What direction could you give them?
So, first of all, keep in mind, fortunately for us all, we live in a democracy. So what we want to do is we want to influence the political process, as people have done by electing a new, younger prime minister who maybe has more relaxed views about marijuana being made available to people. And I would say to everybody, first of all, talk to your politicians. You know, let's see where all the legal, you know, sort of direction with regard to cannabis and marijuana is going. And then there are physicians who are very supportive and knowledgeable about prescribing medical marijuana and giving people the authorization to get a marijuana card, so that if you had, you know, your supply of marijuana, you wouldn't be in any way under any kind of legal duress. And I think it's very important for people to have, you know, that sort of clearance, so that they don't feel like something's going to happen to them untoward if they happen to be on the street, or they get stopped in their car and they have marijuana there. Not to say we should be smoking marijuana in the car, obviously, but even if for some reason it comes up that you had some in your glove box, you shouldn't be vilified for that nor arrested. And the way to avoid that right now is to get a physician to sign for you to get authorization. Now, my hope is that as time goes on, people will not require a medical card to have marijuana, but currently that's the case. So see your physician, you can talk to them about that. If your physician is not comfortable prescribing medical marijuana and you have a legitimate reason for it, the way things stand, there are many physicians that your own doctor can refer you to. And there is even the Canadian Cannabis Clinics group that has started up fairly recently, and there is one in Windsor. They're all around, really, in many cities throughout Canada. I would have to say my own experience with the Canadian Cannabis Clinics has been a bit mixed, in that it still depends on the individual physician who's working in that clinic. And keep in mind that while you need authorization from a physician, you have to realize that not every physician you see is going to want to give you medical marijuana to help you sleep, or to help your anxiety, or to help your pain. They might give you medical marijuana very readily if you have cancer, and that might be the only thing they'll prescribe it for. So you'll have to find, like you would with anything else, a practitioner who's supportive of your own personal health goals. And you want to have a, kind of a rationale. Well, why do you want marijuana? So right now, the way the legal system is, it doesn't appear that marijuana for recreational use is being either encouraged or legitimized by the system the way it is. What is true is that the indications for which a physician will write a medical marijuana authorization have been a bit more liberal. It doesn't have to be that you're dying of cancer. It could be for sleep disturbance, for anxiety, for pain management. There are many other indications. And I'm hoping, as we learn more about it, it'll be easier and easier for people to access, cannabinoids and medical marijuana. My hope would be that physicians won't necessarily be in the middle of that, but even if the legalities of physician involvement with prescribing marijuana change, still it would be a good idea for you to be able to talk to your doc about, hey, I'm interested in marijuana and I happen to get some through, some other thing, just like you would about, say, alcohol intake. My own experience and view of it is the cannabinoids are probably safer than alcohol. They're probably safer than a lot of narcotics. But the way life is, not too loose, not too tight. You don't want to overdo anything. And I think probably marijuana and cannabinoids are sort of like that. You want to find what place they might have in your life. You want to use a balanced approach to understanding what they might do for you. And hopefully get some benefit with no downside. And we will live long and prosper.
Okay. Well, I would like to invite you to go to Rate MD website and fill out the questionnaire there. It's always good to get your opinion, and thank you for taking the time to do that. Well, thank you, Dr. Barnard, for your time, for
Pleasure.
your insight, and for your open mind. I certainly appreciate all the years that you have put in to helping all the people that you have helped. I continue great success, and again, I thank you for your time.
My pleasure.